Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, staring at the massive alien ship floating in space before them. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever built.
Oh.
Its surface gleamed like polished silver and strange blue. Lights pulsed along its hull in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Foster from the communications station. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and fear that everyone on the bridge felt. "Put it through," Jake ordered, straightening his uniform. This was it. First official contact between Earth and the Galactic Council. Everything humanity had dreamed of since they first looked up at the stars. The main screen flickered, and an alien face appeared. The creature looked almost human, but its skin was pale blue, and its eyes were too large, too bright. When it spoke, the words came through a translator device that made its voice sound hollow and strange. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am High Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. The Galactic Council has reviewed your species and has decided to extend membership to your world." Jake felt his heart racing. Earth had been trying to make contact with galactic civilization for 50 years, ever since they detected the first alien signals. Now, it was finally happening. "Thank you, High Commander," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is honored by this opportunity." Veltar's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in those large eyes. "Of course, as a new member species, there are certain requirements. Your people will need protection as you establish colonies. Among the stars, we have prepared a gift for humanity." The alien ship's cargo bay opened, and several smaller vessels emerged. They docked with the Defiance, and Jake could hear the sound of metal clanging against metal as the airlocks connected. Commander Lisa Hayes, the ship's tactical officer, met Jake in the cargo bay as alien workers unloaded crate after crate of equipment. The boxes were marked with symbols that the translation computers couldn't read, but the weapons inside were easy to recognize. Lisa picked up one of the plasma rifles and examined it carefully. She had studied alien technology for years, preparing for this moment. But as she looked at the weapon, her excitement turned to confusion. "Captain," she said quietly, "this technology is old. Really old." Jake moved closer, keeping his voice low so the alien workers couldn't hear. "What do you mean?" "Mean these plasma rifles are at least 3 generations behind what we know the Zephyrians use. The power cells are inefficient, the targeting systems are basic, and the range is terrible." She set the weapon down and picked up a shield generator. "This is even worse. So bulky and slow that any modern weapon would cut right through it." Other officers began examining the equipment. The starship weapons were massive and clunky. The armor was thick, but primitive. Everything looked like it belonged in a museum, not on a modern battlefield. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure about this?" "Positive, sir. Back on Earth, our scientists estimated Zephyrian technology was about 200 years ahead of ours. But this stuff, it's barely 50 years more advanced than what we have now." High Commander Veltar appeared in the cargo bay, moving with the smooth grace of someone used to low gravity. "I trust you find our gift acceptable?" Jake forced a smile. "Very generous, High Commander. Though I have to ask, this equipment seems rather basic compared to what we've observed of Zephyrian technology." The alien's large eyes seemed to gleam with amusement. "These weapons are perfectly appropriate for humanity's current technological level. We would not want to overwhelm a young species with equipment they cannot properly maintain or understand." "Of course," Jake said, though every instinct told him something was wrong. "Your colony ships will launch within the month," Veltar continued. 3 worlds have been selected for human settlement. We have chosen locations that will be safe and suitable for your people." After the aliens left, Jake called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The conference room was small and cramped compared to the vast spaces on the Zephyrian ship, but it felt more honest somehow. "Admiral Collins wants a full report," Jake said, referring to their commander back on Earth. "What do I tell him?" Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the ship's xenobiologist, spoke first. "Something doesn't feel right about this. In all my studies of galactic politics, I've never seen a dominant species welcome newcomers so easily. Usually there's competition, conflict, some kind of testing period. Maybe they're different, suggested Lieutenant Foster. Maybe they really do want to help us. Lisa shook her head. The weapons tell a different story. These aren't gifts, they're chains. If we equip our colonies with this outdated gear, we'll be completely dependent on them for real protection. Chief Engineer Pete Davis had been quiet throughout the meeting. Now he spoke up. I've been thinking about those 3 colony worlds they've picked for us: New Texas, Haven Prime, and Frontier Station. Why those 3? What makes them special? Good question, Jake said. Alina, what do you know about those systems? Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a star chart on the conference room display. All 3 are rich in rare minerals that Earth needs. There. Also isolated far from major shipping lanes and galactic patrol routes. If something happened to our colonies there, it might be days or weeks before anyone noticed. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. So what do we do? Lisa asked. Earth has already committed to this alliance. The colony ships are almost ready to launch. We can't back out now without making enemies of the entire Galactic Council. Jake stared at the alien weapons piled in their cargo bay through the conference room window. Humanity had waited so long to join galactic civilization. But now he wondered if they were walking into a trap. We go forward with the plan, he decided. But we prepare for the worst. Lisa, I want you to work with Pete. Figure out how to modify this equipment. Make it more effective. Do it quietly. What about the colonists? Dr. Rodriguez asked. They're civilians, not soldiers. Then we'd better hope they're fast learners, Jake said grimly. 3 weeks later, the colony ships departed Earth. Jake watched them disappear into hyperspace from the bridge of the Defiance, feeling like he was watching his children walk into a dark forest filled with wolves. High Commander Veltar had seemed pleased when Jake reported the successful launch. Is too pleased, perhaps. The alien's words echoed in Jake's mind. Your people will be safe and well protected. But protected from what? And by whom? As the Defiance followed the colony ships toward humanity's new worlds, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were all flying toward something far more dangerous than the empty space between the stars. 6 months had passed since the colony ships reached their new worlds. On New Texas, Colony Administrator Ben Parker stood in his office watching the sun rise over the settlement they had built. The town looked peaceful, with neat rows of prefab, buildings and fields of earth crops growing in the alien soil, but Ben felt worried. The Galactic Council ships had been visiting more often lately. They always said they were checking on human progress, making sure everything was safe. Yet something about their visits made Ben nervous. His assistant knocked on the door. Sir, we have another council transmission coming in. Ben walked to the communications center, where the large screen showed High Commander Veltar's familiar blue face. But this time, the alien's expression was different. Colder. Administrator Parker, the Galactic Council, has received disturbing reports about your colony. What kind of reports? Ben asked, confused. Intelligence suggests that humans have been modifying their defensive equipment without authorization. This violates the terms of your membership agreement. Ben felt his stomach drop. They'd been making changes to the weapons. Sergeant Rick Coleman, their security chief, had insisted on it. The old Marine said the alien equipment was too slow and clumsy for real combat. Hi, Commander. We've only made minor adjustments to improve efficiency. Unauthorized modifications are considered hostile acts, Veltar interrupted. A peacekeeping force is already en route to investigate. They will arrive in 6 hours. Transmission ended, leaving Ben staring at a blank screen. He ran to find Sergeant Coleman, who was training colonists in the forest outside town. Rick. Coleman was a hard man who had fought in 3 wars on Earth. He had volunteered for the colony mission because he wanted to help protect humanity's future among the stars. When Ben told him about the council ships coming, Rick just nodded grimly. I was wondering when they'd make their move, he said. You expected this? Those weapons they gave us? They're junk. Worse than junk. They're designed to fail. You're no military. Gives away real weapons to potential enemies. Rick looked at the colonists practicing with their modified plasma rifles. Good thing we've been preparing. Preparing for what? War. The peacekeeping fleet arrived exactly 6 hours later. 12 massive ships dropped out of hyperspace and moved into orbit around New Texas. Ben had never seen so much firepower in one place. The lead ship transmitted a simple message: surrender all modified weapons immediately or face the consequences. Ben tried to negotiate, but the aliens weren't interested in talking. Within minutes, dropships began launching from the fleet. Hundreds of them, filled with Zephyrian soldiers and their war machines. The attack began at dawn the next day. Hover tanks rolled across the plains toward New Texas, their energy shields shimmering in the morning light. The alien vehicles were fast and deadly, armed with plasma cannons that could melt through steel. Behind them came companies of Zephyrian infantry. In powered armor, Ben watched from the command bunker as the enemy force approached. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. The aliens moved in perfect formation, like a parade or a ceremony. Their tactics were flawless, their equipment superior. It should have been a massacre, but Rick Coleman had spent 6 months teaching the colonists a different way to fight. He had studied every war Earth had ever fought and learned one important lesson. Technology could be beaten by tactics. When the hover tanks reached the edge of town, they found it empty. The humans had abandoned their prepared positions and scattered into the wilderness. This wasn't what the Zephyrians expected. Their battle plans assumed the humans would fight from fixed positions, like every other species in the galaxy. The aliens hesitated, confused by the lack of resistance. That hesitation cost them. Hidden in the forest, human teams with modified rocket launchers opened fire. The weapons were crude compared to alien technology, but they worked. More importantly, they came from directions the Zephyrians hadn't expected. A hover tank exploded in a ball of flame. Then another. The alien formation wavered as commanders tried to figure out where the attacks were coming from. Rick's voice crackled. Over the radio, Phase 2. Execute. The humans had spent months preparing the battlefield. They knew every tree, every rock, every hiding place in the forest around their town. They had dug tunnels and set traps. They had prepared escape routes and supply caches. Most importantly, they had learned to fight like humans instead of aliens. A squadron of hover tanks pursued a group of retreating colonists into Red Canyon, a narrow gorge south of town. The canyon walls were steep and rocky, perfect for an ambush. The tanks entered the canyon in single file, confident in their shields and armor. They never came out. The humans had spent weeks preparing the canyon, placing explosive charges in the walls. When the tanks were trapped in the narrow space, the colonists triggered the charges. Tons of rock crashed down, burying the entire squadron. Captain Morrison, watching from orbit aboard the Defiance, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The technologically superior alien force was taking heavy casualties from enemies they could barely find. On the ground, the battle had become a nightmare for the Zephyrians. Their perfect formations were useless in the dense forest. Their advanced sensors couldn't track enemies who moved like ghosts through terrain. They knew by heart. Every time the aliens concentrated their forces, the humans would hit them from a different direction and then disappear. Every time they tried to advance, hidden explosive traps would claim more vehicles by noon. The Zephyrian commander was desperate, ordered his forces to pull back and bombard the forest from orbit. But even that didn't work. The humans had prepared underground shelters that could survive anything short of planet-cracking weapons. As the sun set on New Texas, the alien peacekeeping force had lost nearly half its strength. The humans had fought them to a standstill, using nothing but outdated weapons and clever tactics. Rick Coleman sat in his hidden command post, monitoring alien communications. The Zephyrians were panicking. They had never faced an enemy like this before, sir, one of his radio operators said. We're getting reports from Haven Prime and Frontier Station. They're under attack too. Rick smiled grimly. Tell them to stick to the plan. Hit and run, no direct confrontations. Make them afraid of their own shadows. High Commander Veltar's face appeared on every screen in the human colonies that night. His composure was cracking, his large eyes wide with something that looked like fear. This resistance is futile, he broadcast. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. But the humans weren't listening to surrender demands anymore. They had tasted victory against a superior enemy, and they liked how it felt. The galaxy was about to learn that giving humans outdated weapons had been a terrible mistake, not because the weapons were useless, but because forcing humanity to fight with inferior equipment had taught them to fight smarter instead of harder and fighting. Smart was something humans did very, very well. News of the victory at New Texas spread through human space faster than light. On Haven Prime, Major Alex Turner received the battle reports while standing on the deck of a floating platform in the middle of an endless ocean. Haven Prime was different. From New Texas, the planet was mostly water, with thousands of small islands scattered across its surface. The human colony had been built on the largest island, but Alex knew they couldn't defend it the same way Rick Coleman had defended his forest. "Major, we have incoming," called Corporal Dan Price from the radar station. 30 Zephyrian ships, dropping out of hyperspace. Alex watched the alien fleet take position in orbit. They looked angry. The defeat at New Texas had clearly embarrassed them, and they wanted revenge. "All units execute Ocean Protocol," Alex ordered into his radio. The colonists had been preparing for this moment. Within minutes, every human on Haven Prime began moving to predetermined positions. But instead of hiding in bunkers or forests, they were heading for the water. Alex had spent months studying the planet's ocean currents and weather patterns. Haven Prime seas were rough and unpredictable, with massive storms that could sink even large ships. The Zephyrians, who came from a dry world with little surface water, had no experience fighting in such conditions. The first alien dropships landed on the main island to find it almost empty. A few humans remained, firing outdated plasma rifles at the invaders before retreating to boats and submarines. The Zephyrians easily captured the colony buildings. They had won nothing important. The real fight was about to begin in the water. Alex commanded his forces from a captured Zephyrian patrol boat that his engineers had modified. Chief Tony Martinez had worked miracles with the alien technology, combining it with human ingenuity to create weapons the enemy had never seen before. "Submarine drones are in position," reported Lieutenant Kate Wilson from the sonar station. The drones were built from mining equipment and powered by alien energy cells. They were crude and ugly, but they worked. A Zephyrian assault ship was crossing the channel between two islands when the first drone struck. The underwater explosion lifted the entire vessel out of the water before it crashed back down in pieces. "Contact bearing 270, Kate called out. "Enemy hovercraft approaching from the west," Alex smiled. The Zephyrians were trying to use their flying vehicles to hunt human boats, but they didn't understand how the ocean worked. A sudden squall line was moving in from the horizon, bringing with it winds that would ground anything not designed for water operations. "All units into the storm," Alex ordered. The human boats disappeared into the weather like ghosts. They knew these waters, knew how to ride the waves and use the wind. The Zephyrian hovercraft tried to follow, but were soon battered by rain. In Lightning, 3,000 miles away on Frontier Station, Colonel Katie Johnson was facing her own invasion. The asteroid mining facility was built inside a large rock floating in space. With tunnels and chambers carved deep into the stone, Katie had turned the entire asteroid into a fortress. The mining tunnels became kill zones, where Zephyrian energy shields were useless in close quarters. The construction mechs became weapons of war, their industrial tools perfect for tearing apart alien soldiers. "Enemy boarding parties have breached Sections 7 and 12, reported Sergeant Bill Murphy over the intercom. "Let them in," Katie said calmly. "Springtrap 3. The Zephyrians advanced through the tunnels in perfect formation. They're advanced, weapons ready for battle. They expected to find frightened miners hiding in storage rooms. Instead, they found a carefully prepared maze where every corner held death. Chief Tony Martinez had rigged mining charges throughout the asteroid. When the aliens reached the central chamber, Katie triggered the explosives. Not enough to destroy Frontier Station, but enough to collapse several tunnels and trap the invaders inside. The trapped Zephyrians found themselves fighting for their lives against human miners who knew every inch of their underground fortress. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans had home field advantage. Back on Earth, General Susan Wright was analyzing reports from all 3 colonies. The battles were going better than anyone had dared hope, but she knew this was just the beginning. "Dr. Rodriguez, what are you seeing in the intercepted communications?" she asked. The xenobiologist looked up from her computer screens. Panic, mostly. "The Zephyrians are calling these battles unprecedented and chaotic. They keep asking. They're commanders for new orders, but no one knows how to fight humans." "What about the other council races?" "That's where it gets interesting. The Nexari are starting to question this whole operation. Our hive mind is having trouble processing human tactics because we don't think like them." Susan nodded. The enemy alliance was showing cracks, just as she had hoped. On Haven Prime, Alex Turner was leading his flotilla through the worst storm the planet had seen in years. The human boats rode the massive waves like dolphins, while Zephyrian ships struggled just to stay afloat. Target acquired, called Lieutenant Wilson. A Zephyrian command vessel was trying to reach calmer water, but it was moving slowly and predictably. Alex's boat launched a modified torpedo, basically a mining explosive with a navigation system attached. The weapon was crude, but it worked. The alien ship disappeared in a column of water and flame. Similar scenes were playing out across the ocean. Human forces struck from the waves themselves, using the planet's violent weather as both weapon and shield. The Zephyrians had never faced an enemy that could turn an entire world against them. At Frontier Station, Katie Johnson was hunting the remaining invaders through the mining tunnels. Her soldiers moved through the darkness like they were born in it, using mining lights and industrial equipment to create advantages that alien technology couldn't match. "Ma'am, we've got the last group cornered in Storage Bay 5, Sergeant Murphy reported. "Good. Offer them surrender terms." It was a calculated move. Katie wanted some prisoners, partly for intelligence and partly to send a message. The mighty Zephyrian Empire was being defeated by humans with outdated weapons and mining equipment. As news of the continued human victories spread, something unexpected began happening throughout the galaxy. Other species started paying attention to the conflict. Some began asking questions about the Galactic Council's methods. High Commander Veltar, watching his forces suffer defeat after defeat, finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The humans weren't fighting like any civilized species. They were fighting like wild animals, using every dirty trick and unfair advantage they could find, and it was working. For the first time in his long career, Veltar felt something he had never experienced before: fear of a supposedly inferior enemy. The humans had taken their outdated weapons and made them into tools of victory. Worse, they were teaching the galaxy that advanced technology meant nothing without the will and intelligence to use it properly. The war was far from over, but already the balance of power was shifting in ways no one had expected. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's thousand-year history. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great chamber, their voices creating a buzz of nervous energy that even the translation systems couldn't smooth out. High Commander Veltar stood at the center podium, his blue skin looking pale under the harsh lights. The proud Zephyrian leader who had confidently predicted humanity's swift defeat now appeared shaken and uncertain. "The human colonies have proven more difficult to pacify than anticipated," he began, his words carefully chosen. A crystalline Nexari representative, its body gleaming like living diamond, interrupted with a sound like breaking glass. "Difficult. Commander, you have lost 60% of your invasion force to a species armed with obsolete weapons." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Other council members had been watching the conflict with growing alarm. Humans weren't just winning battles, they were doing it in ways that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. "The humans fight without honor," Veltar protested. "They use deception, ambush tactics, and environmental warfare. These are not the methods of civilized beings." "Perhaps," said a voice from the shadows, "but they are effective methods." The speaker was Admiral Kethmer, the Council's most experienced military commander. His species, the Vorthon, were natural warriors who had served as the Council's enforcers. For centuries, if anyone understood the threat humanity posed, it would be him. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting these primitive tactics pose a real danger to our forces? Veltar asked. Kethmer's 4 eyes studied the chamber before he spoke. I'm suggesting that we have underestimated our enemy. The humans are not fighting like primitives. They are fighting like survivors. Council voted to escalate the conflict. 300 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy would be assembled under Admiral Kethmer's command. The fleet would carry planet-cracking weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. The human problem would be solved permanently. But while the Council debated, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew were already preparing for the next phase of the war. The U's Defiance hung in the shadow of a gas giant. Hidden from enemy sensors by the planet's massive radiation field, Chief Engineer Pete Davis had spent weeks modifying the ship's systems, turning the exploration vessel into something the galaxy had never seen before. The new engines are ready, Captain, Pete reported. We can hide in stellar radiation, asteroid, fields, even the outer layers of stars if we have to. No Council ship will follow us there. Commander Lisa Hayes studied the tactical displays showing enemy fleet movements. They're massing at the Centauri staging area. 300 ships, including 5 planet killers. Jake nodded grimly. They mean to end this quickly. What's our status on the new weapons? Loaded and ready, Lisa replied. Though I still can't believe we're going to war with mining charges and construction explosives. Don't forget the kinetic projectiles, added Lieutenant Amy Foster. Just chunks of metal but moving at 90% light speed. It was a typically human solution to a technological problem. Unable to match alien energy weapons, human engineers had gone back to basics. Simple metal projectiles launched at enormous speeds were just as deadly as plasma cannons and much harder to defend against. The first strike came without warning. Admiral Kethmer's flagship was leading the fleet toward human space when the Defiance emerged from the corona of a nearby star. The human ship fired its crude kinetic weapons and disappeared. Back into the stellar fire before the aliens could respond, the flagship's shields held. But the psychological effect was devastating. How had the humans gotten so close? How had they survived in the star's corona? Where had they gone? Similar attacks began happening throughout the fleet. Human ships would appear from impossible locations, strike once, and vanish. They hid in gas clouds, asteroid fields, and the gravity wells of dead planets. Places where no sane captain would take his ship. They're not fighting like spacers, Admiral Kethmer muttered, watching another attack report scroll across his screens. They're fighting like pirates, like desperate criminals. On the human colonies, a new phase of the war was beginning. Master Sergeant Carol Nash had arrived on New Texas with a team of specialists trained in psychological warfare. Their mission was to turn the enemy's own communications against them. Carol had intercepted dozens of Zephyrian military transmissions during the battles. The messages revealed the true nature of the Council's plans for humanity, not just conquest, but complete extermination followed by the harvesting of Earth's resources. Broadcast these on all frequencies, she ordered her team. Every species in the galaxy needs to know what the Council really thinks of junior members. The revelations caused chaos in the galactic capital. Neutral species that had supported the Council's actions suddenly found themselves asking uncomfortable questions. If the Council would lie about humanity's threat level, what else were they lying about? Several minor species withdrew their support. For the war, others began secretly providing intelligence to human forces. The Grand Alliance that had seemed so solid was cracking under the weight of its own deceptions. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Roy Stevens was leading a small human flotilla on the most daring mission of the war. His target was the Zephyrian home system itself, the heart of the enemy empire. Roy's ships were built for stealth rather than combat. They carried the outdated sensors that the Council had dismissed as harmless, but which could map enemy installations without being detected. The Zephyrians had grown, so confident in their technological superiority that they had stopped expecting attacks on their homeworlds. The human ships slipped through the outer defenses like ghosts. Roy's team spent 3 days mapping every military base, every orbital platform, every weapons depot in the system, and they broadcast the intelligence to human forces throughout the galaxy. Suddenly, Council's greatest strength became a weakness. Their centralized command structure meant that disrupting their home systems would cripple their entire war effort. And now, the humans knew exactly where to strike. The psychological warfare was working too. Intercepted communications showed panic. Spreading through the enemy ranks, Zephyrian officers were requesting transfers away from human space. Some were deserting entirely rather than face the unpredictable human tactics. High Commander Veltar, watching his carefully planned invasion turn into a nightmare, made a desperate decision. He would use a planet-killer weapon on Earth itself, ending the war in one brutal stroke. But Chief Engineer Pete Davis had been monitoring enemy communications from the Defiance. When he learned of the plan, he smiled grimly and began working. On humanity's most ambitious project yet, Captain, he called to Jake Morrison. Remember those mining charges we've been using as weapons? I have an idea for a really big one. Within hours, human ships throughout the solar system began converging. On Earth's moon, what they were planning had never been attempted before. But then again, humans had been doing impossible things since the war began. Luna itself was about to become a weapon. Admiral Kethmer's planet killer approached Earth, its massive gun charging, for the shot that would end human civilization. But as the weapon powered up, something impossible happened. Earth's moon began to move. Admiral Kethmer stared at his screens in disbelief. The massive chunk of rock that humans called their moon was moving through space toward his flagship. It shouldn't have been possible. Moons didn't just start flying around on their own. How are they doing this? Asked his tactical officer, voice shaking with fear. Kethmer had no answer. In all his centuries of warfare, he had never seen anything like it. The humans had somehow turned their own moon into a kinetic weapon larger than his entire fleet. On Luna's surface, Chief Engineer Pete Davis was sweating despite the cold of space. His team had worked for days without sleep, turning the moon's mining facilities into the largest engine ever built by human hands. Fusion reactors that had once powered mining equipment now pushed against Luna's mass, slowly accelerating the satellite toward the enemy fleet. Pete, we're getting some serious structural stress readings, called Engineer Amy Clark over the radio. The moon isn't designed to move like this. It just has to hold together long enough, Pete replied, watching his instruments. If this works, the war is over. If it doesn't, we're all dead anyway. Dr. Alina Rodriguez was coordinating the evacuation of Earth's population to underground shelters. If the Zephyrian planet killer fired, millions would die. But she had faith in Pete's crazy plan. Humans had been doing impossible things since this war started. Hi, Commander Veltar watched Aluna's approach from his command ship and felt something he had never experienced before. Absolute terror. The humans weren't just moving their moon. They were aiming it directly at his planet killer. Fire the main weapon, he screamed at his gunners. Destroy Earth now. But it was too late. Luna's mass was creating gravitational distortions that threw off the planet killer's targeting systems. The massive beam fired wide, missing Earth entirely and burning a hole through empty space. Admiral Kethmer realized that his entire fleet was in danger. Luna might be moving slowly, but it had the mass of a small planet. If it hit his flagship, the impact would destroy everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. All ships, emergency retreat, he ordered. The mighty Galactic Council fleet, the most powerful military force in known space, fled in panic from a flying moon controlled by humans with outdated weapons. Captain Jake Morrison watched the enemy retreat from the bridge of the Defiance. It was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The aliens who had tried to destroy humanity were running away in terror. Signal from Earth Command, reported Lieutenant Amy Foster. Admiral Collins wants to speak with the Council representatives. On the Zephyrion flagship, High Commander Veltar received the human transmission with shaking hands. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to Admiral Frank Collins, the gray-haired human who had seemed so weak during their first negotiations. High Commander, Collins said calmly, I believe you wanted to discuss surrender terms. The words hit Veltar like a physical blow. Surrender? The Galactic Council didn't surrender to primitive species armed with obsolete weapons. But looking at his tactical displays, showing Luna still approaching and his fleet in full retreat, he knew they had no choice. "What do you want?" Veltar asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Peace," Collins replied. "But on our terms this time." Negotiations took place on a neutral space station near the galactic core. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness something unprecedented. The Galactic Council admitting defeat to a species they had tried to destroy. Admiral Collins led the human delegation, flanked by Captain Morrison and Dr. Rodriguez. Across the table sat High Commander Veltar and the remaining council leaders, their faces showing the strain of their impossible situation. "The human colonies will remain independent," Collins stated. "All council forces will withdraw from human space immediately." "Agreed," Veltar said quietly. "Furthermore, the outdated weapons will be replaced with current military technology. Earth will also receive full access to galactic trade networks and scientific databases." This caused murmurs of protest from some council members, but Veltar silenced them with a gesture. They were in no position to argue. "There is one more thing," Collins continued. "Other species have approached us about forming a new alliance. One based on cooperation rather than domination." It was true. The revelations about the Council's treatment of humanity had caused a political earthquake throughout the galaxy. Dozens of species were ready to abandon the old system in favor of something more fair. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward. "We're not looking for revenge, High Commander. We're looking for a galaxy where species can work together as equals." Veltar studied the humans across the table. They had every right to demand punishment, to humiliate their defeated enemies. Instead, they were offering partnership. It was perhaps the most alien thing about them, their ability to forgive even after suffering betrayal. 6 months later, Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned U.S. Liberty, humanity's first true warship built with advanced galactic technology. The real weapons weren't the plasma cannons or energy shields. They were the tactical computers loaded with human military doctrine. Other species were sending officers to study at the new human military academy on Mars. They wanted to learn the chaos tactics that had defeated superior technology. The galaxy was discovering that there was more than one way to fight a war. Commander Lisa Hayes. Now Admiral Hayes reviewed reports from the former Council space. The Zephyrian Empire was fragmenting as subject species declared independence. The rigid alliance that had controlled the galaxy for centuries was falling apart. "Any regrets?" Morrison asked her. Lisa smiled. "About what?" "Giving the galaxy a chance to be free?" On New Texas, Sergeant Rick Coleman was training a mixed unit of humans and aliens in guerrilla warfare. Former enemies worked side by side, learning tactics that their own militaries had never imagined. "The key," Rick explained to his diverse class, "is not to fight the enemy's war. Make them fight yours." A young Zephyrian officer raised his hand. "But Sergeant, these tactics seem so chaotic." "That's the point," Rick replied with a grin. "Chaos is what happens when rigid thinking meets creative problem solving. And humans have been creative problem solvers since we first picked up rocks and figured out how to throw them." High Commander Veltar, now serving as a liaison between the old council races and the new galactic government, often reflected on the war that had changed everything. Humans had been given outdated weapons as a way to keep them weak and dependent. Instead, though outdated weapons had freed humanity from the constraints of conventional galactic warfare, unable to rely on superior technology, they had been forced to rely on superior thinking. The irony was perfect. The Council's attempt to chain humanity had given them the key to victory. Dr. Rodriguez published her final report on the conflict, noting that the war had fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed warfare itself. Advanced technology was still important, but so were adaptability, creativity, adapting, and the willingness to fight unconventionally, as she wrote in her conclusion. "The Galactic Council gave humans outdated weapons and expected us to lose. They forgot that humans have been winning wars with inferior equipment for thousands of years. We just needed to remember how. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species that had turned their moon into a weapon and made the stars themselves their battlefield. Humanity had earned their place among the stars, not through superior technology, but through superior determination. And in the end, that made all the difference.